Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. The Legion Mage Tower will be going away in just a couple of short days. I'm definitely gonna miss it because to me, it's one of the best features of that expansion that was brought back to the game. Over the timeline that is World of Warcraft existence, so many different features like the Mage Tower have been added and then removed at some point or another. A ton of these features were players' favorites, and many still hold out hope that these features could return in a future update. So to pay an homage to the Mage Tower, I wanted to list 10 of the most popular features of older expansions that players loved back in the day, and maybe at some point, some of these features could return just like the Mage Tower did. Before we get into the list though, most of you guys watching these videos are still not subscribed, but the more of you are reminded, the more of you do, so let's keep it going. Subscribe to the channel as well as to the bell, especially if you want to get more fun videos like these and future updates for World of Warcraft, like for patch 9.2. This list isn't exactly in the order from the least popular to the most popular, it's just kind of a smattering of a bunch of features that players missed. But the first one on our list is going to be the Flight Master's Whistle. It's an item we used back in Battle for Azeroth and Legion, however it didn't make it into Shadowlands. What the whistle would do is it would taxi you over to the nearest flight point available. So if you're out in the open world doing dailies, slaying rares, and you need to get over to a flight point really quickly, you would blow the whistle, get ported over to the nearest flight point, and you can go anywhere you want to. BFA and Legion zones were constructed in such a way where they were massive and there was a lot of exploration and a lot of little nooks and crannies and treasures that really wanted for players to go out and explore, but it also made doing some of the dailies in this massive big open world with many different elevations a little bit harder for max level players. So the whistle would let you go out of the beaten path, get your dailies done, and then whistle back in order to continue doing your dailies smoothly. It was a solid middle ground between having straight up flying to get around quicker and not having flying at all, before Blizzard eventually enabled Pathfinder so players could fly all over the world. The next is going to be Scenarios from Mists of Pandaria. Scenarium, whichever way you say it, Scenarios were a 3-man content, kind of like a dungeon, but without the need for a tank or a healer. They were added in Mists of Pandaria and planned to add more of them in Warlords of Draenor, but Blizzard didn't do that. There were mostly instances for storytelling that told some of the stories of like Theramore bombing back in Mists of Pandaria that were relatively easy to do in the normal mode, but they also had a heroic mode, which offered better rewards and slightly tougher enemies. Players liked it because it was a way for triple DPS to queue for something without necessarily having to wait for the tank or the healer to sign up. In fact, scenarios still exist to this day, just not in the same form. They're mostly used for any solo content, like the Mage Tower for example, or the Withered training if you did that back in Legion, and they're also used for very important story quests. If they did bring it back, however, I hope they will focus more on the combat and the gameplay rather than the storytelling elements. The next feature is going to be a class feature for warriors, that is the Gladiator spec of Warlords of Draenor. This was back in the day when warriors still had stances, and this talent would give the Prot Warrior a brand new stance of the Gladiator Stance through the talent of Gladiator's Resolve. Gladiator Stance increased your damage done, buffed your mastery, and effectively allowed a tank warrior to fill the shoes of a DPS role. It almost felt like a fourth spec. You had the Arms, Prot, Fury, and now Gladiator. Of course, balancing was definitely a nightmare back then, but it was a fun way for players to play the same spec they know and love. Imagine the same Prot Warrior abilities, but now from a perspective of a DPS, giving you all that control, all that gameplay of a sword and board, but rather trying to dish out damage instead of protecting your allies. The next on the list is going to be Glyphs. Glyphs were added together back in the day with the inscription profession and were ways to augment your character's damage, defensives, and utility capabilities. They would change the way your character played offensively, defensively, and even gave you extra utilities to work with, and even change some of your abilities in a cosmetic fashion. If you're currently playing Shadowlands, they're basically conduits. It is exactly the same system of the defensives, offensives, and utility ways that you can augment your character. Except back then, Glyphs were part of our class toolkit. They weren't really a borrowed power, and back then players enjoyed having that extra layer, not just talents but now glyphs, of ways that we can augment and change our characters and how they perform in dungeons, raids, or PvP. For the next feature, let's head back to classes and talk about the Druid Symbiosis, which was a spell that lets you link yourself to another player and trade class abilities depending on the spec that you played and the class that they played. The list of the abilities that you could get is pretty massive, but to give you a small taste, as a Guardian Druid linked to a Warrior, you got Spell Reflection. A Feral Druid linked with a Paladin got Divine Shield. Rested Druid linked with a Mage got Ice Block, which was exceptionally strong in PvP. Whoever was linked to the Druid through Symbiosis also got one of the Druid's abilities. Blood Death Knights gained the defensive of Might of Ursoc. Elemental Shamans gained Solar Beam, which gave him a second interrupt in PvP. Shadow Priest gained Tranquility, which back then actually was a pretty decent heal for your group. Not every single class got a useful spell, like Holy Paladins got Wrath, which didn't really do much, but this was definitely one of the most unique abilities in all of World of Warcraft. The next feature is going to be hunter pets that had unique special abilities. Right now, every single hunter pet is broken down into either ferocity, tenacity, or cunning tree, with very specific passive and active abilities to provide. Depending on the family of that pet, they may come with abilities like a Mortal Strike, which is useful in PvP, maybe a sprint or a stealth ability, maybe even a defensive if they're a tanky pet, but none of them have any advantages from one another in the damage department. All the pets have been standardized for a very long time. But that wasn't always the case. Back in the old days, hunters could tame certain rare pets out in the open world, and these rare pets had extra special effects about them. There was a rare cat in the Badlands that had the fastest auto attack speed in the game, or the wolves from Alterac Valley had the fastest running speeds. There was even a rare spawn in Duskwood whose abilities did shadow damage instead of physical, which gave you the biggest buff as it could bite through enemies' armor in PvE. And many players missed when certain pets had unique abilities about them that made them stand out from the rest. And I could see them actually bringing back unique pets at some point in the future expansion, maybe as part of a special questline only available for Beast Mastery Hunters. As other classes could get abilities and new talents, Beast Mastery Hunters could get new pets to tame, and these pets could come with very special effects that would kind of be part of their class toolkit. Let me know in the comments what you think about that idea. Then we have the artifact weapons of Legion. As you leveled, instead of getting new class abilities, you would instead power up your artifact weapon, which came with active abilities and passives that changed the way your class played in drastic ways. There were so many different iconic class abilities like Uther's Ashbringer or the Doomhammer from Thrall, but many of the other specs that didn't have any iconic weapons in WoW history also got some unique weapons with some backstory. You could get different colors and appearances of these weapons depending on the stuff you did in the game, whether you PvP'd or finished main quest lines or even did the hidden quest, which was unique to every single spec in the game. But the artifact weapons also came with order halls and the storylines for those order halls, the missions, the upgrades, and so much to do throughout the expansion of Legion, which gave so many different classes a lot more replayability, as every class came with unique weapons, unique storylines, unique lore of how it all came together, of how your character got to wield these powerful weapons. On the same flavorful note as artifact weapons, class ability quests used to be a thing. Instead of just unlocking these spells and abilities when you hit certain levels, we used to have to train these abilities at a class trainer. But certain abilities couldn't be trained easily. Instead, they came with a whole class quest of how to unlock and learn to use these spells. For example, when I did the Rogue Poison questline as an Alliance human rogue, I had to journey to a tower out in Westfall, pickpocket a couple of guards until I get the key, try to see if I can incapacitate an elite next to a box, lockpick it very quickly, and sprint out of there. That whole questline taught me the importance of rogue stealth and that running is always an option. It was a small chapter of my overall rogue journey that added extra flavor to the overall experience. And to many players, these class ability quests felt like a rite of passage. That's why so many of them are memorable to this day. And then there's the full talent trees of older expansions. Back in the old days, every few levels you would gain a talent point, and you could spend the talent point into the expanded talent trees of old. The more points you invested into a tree, the more powerful effects you could play with. But in the early levels, you weren't going to see any of those passives anytime soon. Instead, at the start of your leveling journey, you got points to make your character walk faster, or as a rogue, you got points for improved stealth. Maybe as a mage you would cast your Frostbolt slightly faster, or as a warrior your Battle Shout buff would last a little bit longer. A lot of the improvements at the very beginning were very small, but they felt meaningful out in the open world. The early talent trees did a really excellent job of making it feel like your character is interacting with the world easier as you invest more points into your talents. The reason they changed the talents from the old to the new is because they wanted for talents to function better for endgame content. And I think they can, especially if the choices in the talent rows are fairly well balanced. But the older talent trees are a bit more fun when it comes to leveling. You get to interact with them a lot more often since you get more points to put into. And even though a lot of them do end up being very cookie cutter, it still felt a little bit more interactive than the current version of talent trees. Finally, a very much missed feature is Reforging, added back in Mists of Pandaria. Reforging allowed you to reforge the secondary stats of your gear, letting you reallocate certain amounts of your secondary stats into the secondary stats of your choice. This was mostly added for players to have an easier time managing their hit and expertise stats, which were arbitrary stats that allowed your character to hit or miss certain abilities unless you hit a certain breakpoint. You needed a certain amount of hit and certain amount of expertise depending if you're melee class or range class, depending if you're into boss fights or into PvP. With a hit stat, you needed a minimum in order to make sure you don't miss, and you didn't get any benefits for going over that stat. So Reforging lets you make sure you're hitting that minimum number as closely as possible. And even though we no longer have hit or expertise stats on our gear, many players would love to see Reforging return. Even back then, many players got to play around with different secondary stats, going for a haste heavy build or a crit heavy build, seeing if maybe a mastery heavy build will yield some results, and gave players a lot more creativity to experiment with different playstyles. I think Sims and theory crafting has mostly replaced this, because if you want to try different builds, you can always plug your character in Sims to find out how the secondary stats affect your performance. But many players would love to see Reforging come back so they could better control their gear, so they could choose which secondary stats they want more of and adjust in case you get something that's kind of decent from a raid or a dungeon, but could definitely be made better, and Reforging would give players more of that control. Anyway, that's going to be my list of the 10 features that were the most popular from back then that many players would still love to see today. Let me know in the comments if you think I missed a feature, maybe one of your favorites that you feel like should have definitely been on this list. If you guys enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. And as per usual, link to the channel Discord is in the description of every single video. If you guys aren't part of the Discord, you should join the community. That's probably the best place to reach me directly. DMs always open. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. You let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.